So thank you, Linda and Paul, for giving us our presentation. I'd say good afternoon, but I suspect it might be good morning for the pair of you. Yeah, but you've said that you're happy for people to post questions in the chat whilst you're talking. There will be time at the end for people to post questions, and I will also ask that the pair of you pop your email addresses in the group chat, but we can do that at the end just so people have follow-up questions. I'll also ask that everyone provides feedback. It's really helpful, and I'll post a link to to give us feedback in the chat when we're partway through the session. But enough of me. I'll hand over to you, Linda, and to you, Paul.
Okay, great. And it's so great to be here with everyone this morning. For us, it is in the morning. And so my name is Linda Carroll, and I am an expert capacity planner at Insono. I have been in the IT industry for 44 years. I got my start straight out of college back in 1980, back when they were still Card Punch and DOS and some of the very much older operating systems were around. I have worked at Equifax. I've spent years at IBM, and I am now with Insono. And Paul, I want you to introduce yourself as well.
Thanks, Linda. Yeah, I work with Linda. I'm at Insono as well. I'm a principal mainframe system programmer. I've been doing automation in the mainframe space for over 15 years now, and my area that I focused on has been event management. So with that, let's go ahead and kick it off, Linda. And as a managed server, if you're not familiar with Insono, Insono is a managed service provider in the mainframe space today. And as one who supports a large client base with hundreds of LPARS, how do we make each client feel like the only client and support our staff to manage events? With an increase in variables across the board, with event management reporting and automating each system, my thoughts drifted off to the poker table. In optimal game theory, I love games that require a lot of thought and critical thinking, like Sudoku, poker. There's Magic the Gathering. There's chess and other games. And I'm probably overthinking this to an extent. I am, yes. In another sense, this is the optimal time for AI to help resolve these issues that we're having today. It really is. So, shall we play a game? I hope you all love the older computer movies because we're going to be referencing
Right.
a lot of those today. Linda and I both are big fans of the movies that came out in the 80s that reference computers. With the love of computers and movies such as War Games and Tron, the impossible seem possible, right? War Games
Right.
specifically for will the AI make the right choice? I mean, that's on everybody's minds today. And Linda and I just had some good conversations about this last night.
Right. And what we were talking about is, for example, I was using Chat GPT to create an article for me, something that I was going to speak. And I shared it, and my daughter goes, "Mom, that's not your voice." And so we have to really be careful when we're using those types of tools to make sure that it is really representing who we are. I mean, the words sounded great, but it wasn't me actually speaking them. And Paul, you had an example from a
Yeah,
school point of view, an educational point of view.
right. Yeah. So my wife works as an administrator in a middle school, and the thing that they do with students today is they have students write out papers at least once a month in class by hand, and this way they can understand the student's voice and make sure that they are not using Chat GPT or other AIs along the way. Um, and if you take a look at like Tron, the Legacy, the AI makes the wrong choice, right? And
Mm-hmm.
The user has to go in and save the day. Um, is the data skewed? Is it biased? And is there a need to balance the data? Absolutely. One of our colleagues last year was talking about this from her perspective, and I think there's the game The Circle that's doing this as well, Linda.
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh. I don't know if anybody's been watching that on Netflix. Season 6, I have to you have to understand I geek out on this. Because the whole context of that game, this show, is everybody does things by text messages, and they have to build relationships and partner and team up, and they end up blocking people who they don't want to continue in the game. And this season they introduced an AI personality that the people that were in it were not able to identify. They kicked out a real person instead of the AI person.
So that gets us into what is game theory. Game theory came to mind in event management because of the interdependency aspects. You may have a neighboring business replacing their parking lot and break your fiber trunk. Yes, this is a real world example that we've seen in the industry. Dash replication failed, then users could not get to the system since it was remote. Yep, again, another real world example happened recently in the US for a business where their DASD system failed. And their whole business was out for 2 days. These are extreme examples that would be very hard to connect the dots. Who would be monitoring construction of a neighboring business, right? And it doesn't happen today. So these are things that are the outliers that we just can't come to grasp with. So I'm assuming everyone's played with a deck of cards, seen a magic trick, played poker, right? Played in a tournament, hopefully. I just like geeking out to numbers. 52 factorial. That is such a large number. That is more ways to order a deck of cards than there are atoms on Earth. Even with everyone on Earth shuffling and dealing cards, it would take a time that is just inconceivable. Mainframes, on the other hand, are more predictable with the interdependencies and not as mathematically complicated in event monitoring today. So, are we just exaggerating or just getting our geek on? Well, the latter. We just get our geek on day in and day out. It's just, I'm sure Stephen Purvis out there, and he's just like, yep, we got our geek on, right? And if you haven't, go to his 7.9's Discord. That's a fun place to go talk about mainframes. When it comes to IPLing a system, a mainframe is rather predictable. An optimal game theory is easily applied. Think at least 3 phases of a base where you can log in and issue commands, etc. A miscellaneous phase, which would be your everything else that you need to get the system steady, and then an online phase. So we got 3 phases of the system. Your important stuff, the stuff to keep your system running, to keep your business running, and then your onlines to interact with all your other items. You can tune to the optimal strategy for bringing your system up and down with known dependencies. So the math there gets to be fairly predictable. It's not as complex, and we'll have a slide a little bit later that shows that. So how about global thermonuclear war, right? Going back to the War Games reference, chess comes to mind as we start to move into the mainframe space. With hundreds of years, the optimal game theory is there. However, now imagine 10, 20, or 30 games side by side. Can you easily predict those on a consistent basis? And that's what we face today as a managed service provider. So not only are we playing one game, we're playing hundreds of games simultaneously. What is the next move and be 90% correct or higher? If you know the players, it can make that predictability easier as you have added trending to the players' abilities. Now what happens when you have an unknown player. So opening chess moves, the first 4 moves, just the first 4, 318 billion combinations, right? As you wish. Sorry, little Princess Bride there for you. The number of opening combinations in chess is quite staggering. IPLing a mainframe to base state is quite simple. Security, Jazz, TSO, it's very predictable. And if we look at the next slide, we took a mapping of a small system, and it starts up there with command 00. I know it's very, very hard to read, but this is just to kind of show you that the first 6 or 7 items of the mainframe is very predictable. From machine to machine, the only thing that's going to change is that Jazz 2 to Jazz 3 possibly, and your security. Very, very predictable. But once that happens, the system explodes. You've got all these paths of prereqs and postreqs, and it gets very complicated. So how do we maintain that? Again, it's very predictable. It's not as bad as trying to, figure the odds, the pot odds in the major poker tournament. So IPL versus event management, right? IPLs, the game theory has been around. It is easy to gauge and easy to deploy. Now, it could get more complex if you have an IPL utilizing different automation packages, but that is an entirely different discussion. Event management, though, we now have our interdependencies. We have unknowns. We have the human factor. Humans have led to more interesting cascading events than I could ever imagine, from physically impacting systems to typos and, of course, bad code, right?
Right. For example, we had an issue. Oh gosh, this is way back when we had 3330 spinning disk, and there was an error on one of the disk drives. So what they did was I thought, oh, wait a second, let's pick this one up. Let's move it over here to the next one. Oh, that one failed. So they kept moving it. So by the time they got done, the entire disk complex was done.
Yeah.
Just that's human error.
Absolutely.
Oops,
a lot of companies use their LPAR name, their sys name. A lot of them will use sys A. And as a managed service
IPO
provider,
1. IPO
right,
1.
as a managed service provider, we don't have one sys A. We have 10 sys A's from all different companies and all different perspectives. So you may have someone saying, "Oh, go to the HMC, go reset the sys A," and someone else is off onto this client and goes and pops the wrong box. I've seen it happen. It has happened. It will happen without, that's just the nature. It's just it's the view that's biased. So one person's thinking this way, one person's thinking that way. So the error does happen. So it's very interesting to see in event management, and it gets very complex because if you've been around the mainframe space, you know that the message IDs are 8 characters long, and there's thousands of them. So we talk about this novice mode. How hard is it to monitor a client? I think if I went to a single client shop like this, I would get bored very, very fast. I like solving puzzles, and in a single shop, you can usually get all those puzzles solved, and you can figure out what's going on very fast, and it becomes a nice place. You can do a lot of development. But we talk about this because the LPAR count. There's 1 to 5 LPARs. We've seen places that don't even have a test LPARs. They're only 1 LPAR. Usually they're Jazz 2. No offense to the Jazz 3 or eJazz folks, but Jazz 2 is dominant. Your STC counts, especially, are not that involved. In your onlines, you may have a few of those. You may be like an insurance company and have to have, connections to your websites. Cross-platform is very limited, usually along those onlines. This is a nice mode to be in sometimes.
Right. And one of the things that we saw, everybody knows, 2020, um, we had some very interesting, cascading events that people didn't plan on. When we think about that, we had various state agencies and that dealt with unemployment, childcare services. Um, they didn't plan for these unexpected increases in their workloads. But then also on the same side, we saw other clients who had their workload decreased because the sales weren't being done. For example, some insurance companies, their workloads just absolutely tanked. Travel industry tanked. So it's how do we deal with some of these issues as well in being able to plan and do this event management for not just one client, but let's add to the mix. If my slide will advance, there we go. Oops, went too far. Let's go back one. So now we're talking 10 to 30 clients. So now we're looking at 20 to maybe 120 different LPARs. And as Paul said, we're looking at things that have multiple IPO1s, multiple SIS1s, SIS-As, things like that. JES 2, JES 3. They may have 3 to 5 different automation packages split between those different clients, 10 to 20 different scheduling packages. Now the onlines are so much broader. We're seeing, that CICS, the IMS, MQ, Database, IDMS, Supra. Clients have multiple different types of onlines. Cross-platform is now there. What are the things have I missed on this one?
Yeah, and that's a great place to start. But keep in mind, in a single shop, you can have an operations staff of a person per shift. So you may have 3 people working 5 days a week. You may not even have batch processing on the weekends. Uh, in this scenario, is most likely you're having at least 3 people, 24 hours, um, maybe 2 or 3 a shift, maybe 2 shifts a day, 7 days a week. Um, that's because they're having to stare at consoles all day long. In Sono, we've gone to a single pane of glass that's really allowed our operators to work in a shared environment to do their event management. However, at this level, a lot of places are still doing eyes on glass, eyes on consoles. And so this gets to be straining. How do you keep it straight? Because we know a terminal session is only as good as it's named, either at the top or the sysname. And if you're just not paying close enough attention, you can do a command on the wrong console. So this is where the cascading human errors increase significantly.
And then go to the next slide.
And then, yes, you name it, we have seen it. There is very few products that come across our doorstep now that someone in our company has not seen. We have clients that are so back leveled, they're going through several upgrades just to get them to supported hardware.
Mm-hmm.
Their end of life, end of supports on products that haven't been supported in 5 or 10 years in some cases. We see systems that are clients that have 20, 30 LPARs, and
Mm-hmm.
they have a huge amount of online regions. We're talking hundreds per client in some cases. So this is where we have entered that elite mode, the boss level. Think of the video game where it's just the most the most
Mm-hmm.
complex setting you can get, right? And this is where it gets very interesting, trying to correlate all these events, trying to maintain a global set of not just automations but event management. How do we make this global? And so we've done that in a way where we give it our best shot. And in most cases, what's good for one client does correlate to good for another client. The problem is some clients over automate. They had that single shot mentality. They had the time. So they went through it, automated and re-automated and re-automated. Those are clients that you don't really want to take out that automation because it's just so intertwined. You're just like standing up a new box and then trying to load everything up and not break anything. Um, and that's where the challenges just magnify. It's just
Right.
yeah.
Well, and then in some cases, though, as you have alluded to, Paul, is that we have been able to, deep dive into those integrations that they've done in those automations and have said, oh, wait a second, why can't we use that over here as well? Because it was so good. And so we're able to, because we see so many different environments come through, we're able to do that and able to interpret and bring that top tier client interfaces across the board. And that does really help with these situations, as you were saying, with operators, eyes on glass, multiple at the same time. I can remember back in the old days, when you had, as a single company, you had, 5 LPARs. There was a console for each LPAR, whereas today it's all one syslog, all of those different things. And that's also where what we're also seeing is, and I'm going to pop to the next slide, because we're both in this one. Yes, I'm old enough to remember when the MCP was just a chess program. I have a presentation I'm going to be doing later with one of my coworkers, where we talk about what it was like coming into this industry I came into this in 1980, and we still had a card deck feeding programs. So we only had, if you think about it, if you put a card deck in, that's the only thing the operating system was focusing on. Whereas today, we now have AI integrated into the latest operating system release to help workload manager control the batch workload. Think about how far we've come in this.
Yeah. I know we're ahead of schedule, Linda, and
Oh,
so
yeah, we're way ahead.
yeah. And Martin, you're right. Hundreds of DB2s are not that rare. It just gets challenging when you've got some clients using DB2 database. You toss in the IMS, the IDMS, the Supra, and a lot of different onlines into that mix and the different correlations. And that's where it becomes challenging is when you're selling those services, is how do you balance that staff out to make sure that they understand those products? When in some cases you may have, a landslide of people using CICS or IMS and only a handful using IDMS. And then you come across a client that's doing something completely different. And so that's, where the challenge comes in as a service provider. And I think, Linda, we see that all the time with SMF as well, right?
Oh, yes. One client I support uses Flasher because they're on just 3. And so then you have to kind of go, okay, I use these commands on this, in this setting, and then over here, oh, I'm on TSO again. And then the other is, and we have seen this, where a state agency, a state, each has their, there's 50 states, they each have their own setups within each department of the state, even though they're all on the same computer, all on the same piece of hardware. This department does it one way. In fact, I saw this. They did the SMF processing one way on this system. They did this way on another system, and the two never talk to each other.
Right.
So that's even just within one state, so to speak. So we do see a lot of those different pieces. And
Yeah, with DB2, okay, let's take the control character, right? Since that's a variable that can be set by system to system. So now you've got Jez2, Jez3, EJez. Then you got DB2 with all these control characters. Our operations staff, um, if they're going from system to system, how can they natively do these commands successfully? And the short answer is without a, we talk about these decoder rings all the time. Is how do we demystify this for our staff? Because realistically, it takes about 2 years for someone to get acclimated to the environment. But how do we? Where's that easy button? As a former boss of mine would say, where's that easy button? How do we standardize that? Automation is great for doing that because you can make pseudo commands so that you don't have to worry about Jez2, Jez3, EJez, or what the control character for DB2 is because it's built into the automation. I see Andy's got a question there. All right, so what's the killer use case for event management and where you're generating events from? Do you use your log product for this? So currently, we're using a product from Broadcom called Automation Points that monitors the systems. We are using the syslog for that to an extent. And I say that because a lot of it's being passed through SNMP or API solutions today. And we're doing that so that we're not just using the log, because we're starting to get into the space of passing data to the ticketing system to say what automation has done. Spool is my prime example of this use case because historically on a system, your spool hits 100%, no one's getting into Jez2. Boom, system shut down. So you always have automation around that. Standard is usually about 30 days or older. Preferably I would like to have someone have savers or RMDS or something like that out there. But if they don't, or if they do it and it's just been flooded, you kind of go with your 30-day rule, your 7-day rule, your high percentage rule. But none of that is in the syslog, because syslog is one line, 80 characters. That's it. I am not a fan of that format going into the future where we're only getting 80 characters of information into ticketing. So how do we start to pull more data? How do we successfully correlate an event? Could I correlate message ID to message ID? Absolutely, been there, done that, do it every day. It's great, it works well, but how do we translate that into better event monitoring where you go from just reactive spools at 80%, I cut a ticket, but what's automation done? So the operator has to go back to the beginning and say, I'm back to 30 days, 7 days, and X percentage. But if we're sending more data up through the ticketing system, yes, we can say you're not starting at square one, you're starting at square four. So yes, syslog is still, or with help from automation packages, SA, Ops MVS, etc. And then you got your sysviews and megamons in there, passing data back through to the syslog as well. You can do a lot of event management with that, and putting it through a screen where operators are not staring at a console, or in this case, tens of consoles. They're staring at a screen with, here's what we're ticketing on. So now you have a GUI interface where you've got the message, you got a hyperlink to the ticketing system, and you've got a hyperlink back to the console. So now the event management has direct correlation. We can correlate the ticket back to the specific system without confusion because it's tied in through the message.
Are we ready to, are there any other questions? You're seeing the questions, I'm not seeing them, so.
Oh yeah, so have we considered using event management to analyze RC to generate more meaningful error messages? Yes, we have.
You have a whole talk on that, don't you, Paul?
I do have a few talks on that. hopefully they get approved for share in the US, but I do have presentations on this. I could talk about event management all day long. So yes, so return codes are not necessarily a true thing on the mainframe because you've got the message ID.
Well, in fact,
I'll drop my
don't
email in the chat, Andy. I sure will. So
well, well, I remember we were talking about this, about the standardization of messages that appear on the console, and that how all the vendors have different message patterns. And it would be great if there was some type of standardization between all the different types of messages that appear on a console.
right. So did we skip that point? Can we go back to the
Sure.
slide?
Which one?
I'm looking for it. Let's go back to slide.
This one?
Yes. Okay. So this is yes. All right. So let me break this down. So we host over 1 million MIPS. So 1 million MIPS, if you
Oh,
multiply
here,
it by
let's go back one
seconds,
more. Let's go
yep.
back two more.
So if we multiply it by seconds, by minutes, by 24 hours, that's 86.4 billion instructions in a day. Okay. That is a lot of processing power. However, we only cut 100,000 tickets a month at best. A lot of that is batch. So if you see the number at the bottom, that's the percentage of tickets per day. So that is a point. The zeros just go out and out and out on that. So it's a very small percentage that's getting ticket generation. And a chunk
Per
of that's just
instruction.
per instruction, per instruction. So that's just a crazy amount of numbers. There's all kinds of suppression that's being done. There's informational messages that we just don't care about today. Okay, I say we don't care about the informational messages because they're not actionable, because we ticket on what's actionable. However, informational messages become very important as you do correlation, as you do prediction and analysis. What informational messages are tied to the actual error messages? So this gets to be very, very fascinating when you start doing a deep dive on it. So oh yes. So we talked about the 318 billion opening move combinations, okay? So if you look to the right, that 3.86 billion, that's the number of MIPS that would be needed to be able to issue that many of moves in a day. Okay, so it will be 3 times as large as almost 4 times as large as we are today to be able to issue that many combination moves in a single day. That's just how impactful this can be. All right.
Figured
Go
out how
ahead.
to do the laser tool.
There
So,
we go.
and
Yeah.
so then when you look at this chart, you know, where you start with this very simple array here, and then you move down to the complexity here, and then just magnify this times 50, 100, 1,000.
Yeah.
You
So
know, we
absolutely.
then
So let's
become
look
into the Star Trek world.
right. So here are the knowns here, right? Is if I'm IP only a system, I care about this the started task start message and the started task end message. Now, most of the end messages are going to be the IEF 405, and that's going to be it. They're going to be done. What's different usually is the start message. That way I know this task started. Then each of these have their subclass of messages. So like job track will have track warn and track 0015W. That's the bottom one in the pink down there. So that's the scheduling package to tell us what's appended. Yeah, absolutely. So we're able to make correlation to tasks that way. But if you look at some of the structures on the right, where we have interdependencies between like GSA and sysview, so how do we? That's where we start to build correlations between tasks. And if I had, this is a small system that does not have onlines, but if we were to look at, your onlines, there's correlation between DB2, MQ, IMS, all day long, right? Um, and how do those impact each other? And those are known today in the industry. Those are very common events to correlate together. It just gets very complex, like I said, because I can do that for a client, but on another client, I might have to do DB2 Supras and MQ. On another one, I might have to do CICS, MQ and DB2, or IDMS, MQ, and, it just goes on and on. So now we're having to create the logic between these predictions across the board. That's where it gets complex and fun.
Okay, so let's fast forward back to where we were.
Yeah, so Andy, yeah, your point is, could AI be useful and for analysis of AI so operators don't have to worry about them, but it could help find the problem before it is big. Absolutely. And that's what our product does today is it takes and weaves through all those messages and puts the important ones in front of the operators. We are putting some planning on putting some AI chatbots behind there as well, because we want to be able to see what people have done in the past that works. And so we're planning that out so it's a very successful program going into the future. And we do some of that in the ticket as well.
Right.
All right.
And that's one of the things that we were talking about as well, Paul, is that, in our brain, we can carry all of this information, like we were talking about. We can think about the past. And we were also talking about the visual person versus the analytical person, in that a visual person can really see a trend easier than an analytical. In other words, do you like things to be in a number format versus a chart or a graph? And then when we start adding into this the AI complexity of, being able to look at the future and the past to predict the future, that's where we get into these things of KPIs and all of those. Is this pattern repeating itself? How is it doing it? And that's really where having some of this AI built into it can actually, instead of trying to manually correlate the events, it can be done with an AI or some type of mathematical formula. If you think about it, a lot of forecasting stuff like that is just mathematical formulas.
Absolutely. Right. So you've
Hmm.
done that in the capacity world for a
Right.
long time. And I've done that in automation world, right? Is how do we predict things? How do we correlate things? How do we solve problems before they're problems? Um, there's a lot of talk of doing stuff through ticketing systems today, and inside our own company. And one of the things as a mainframe person I talk about, especially with our leaders, is that a lot of the automation happens on the mainframe before we even get to the ticketing system. Is
Hmm.
90% of the work today is happening there. If we want to make the shift to correlate more with ticketing, we have to be smart about what we're doing. Because when we jump off the mainframe, right, things get slower. Things are, it doesn't have the same amount of brain power. It doesn't have, the same structure. Yes. We talk about orchestration with our ticketing system. It's like the paint job in the interior of the car. It's fancy, it looks nice, but if we're not attached to the engine, right, and the mainframe is not going anywhere, that's where a bulk of the work lies. I am a big proponent of the new tools, ZOAU, Ansible, etc., because they are very supportive, especially for a managed service provider. Oh, stepping into the future. Oh, so this is where I think we will start to open it up to questions if you want to come off
Hmm.
mute.
Well, and then, as we've already talked about, AI does have so much potential for reducing risk, for simplifying the mainframe, for reducing the learning curve. I mean, if a lot of us remember back in the old days, we would have to go and read the manual, figure it out. Today we have OSMF. We have the AI that's being built into workload manager. And that's just the first step of that, so that there's not as much understand. We're letting the system take over, so to speak, so that there's fewer issues, fewer tickets, and more time to explore what the applications are really doing. Why is it being run? How is it being run? How can we make it run better, faster, and those type of things?
Because you wrote Red Books back in the day, right?
Yes. Yes.
So if anyone doesn't remember, back in the day, you'd have a cart of manuals sitting in your computer lab, in your shop, and if you had an error, that's where you went to go look for it. Think of the old encyclopedias, except a lot worse.
Right. In fact, IBM would send out updates like once a month, and you'd have to go to your library and pull the manual out, take out the old pages, put in the new pages, and they had a line on the side of the page that said this was what was new.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, with that, let me go back one. As Nathan has we would absolutely love to have your feedback on this. This is the QR code. So if you want to take your phone, you can actually scan this and give us your feedback, because we would love to hear your feedback on this and how we can make this better.
Thank you, Linda and Paul. Thank you for putting your email addresses in. I will also post in the chat a
Okay.
link to provide
I
feedback.
put the emails. Yep, emails are in there.
Emails are in there. I can see those. We've also had a few questions and a few comments.
I think we got to most of the questions. I think if there's new ones.
Let me just check that we've got them all. We had
No worries,
Stephen's comment about squirrel outages. If everyone I can draw everyone's attention to that one. Martin Packer commented on the number of DB2s. Comment about TVAN.
Yep. Did
we fully cover Andy's question about the killer use case for event management?
I think we did. Like I said, I could talk all day long about event management. I know Stephen and Linda get tired of it sometimes because I'm very passionate about the subject.
Well, no, I think we're all passionate about what we do, and that's why we're here, is to be able to share that with others, to see, what is the realm of possible, and think about what's to come.
Yeah. Andy, my email's in the chat. Please feel free to reach out. And Stephen, you're not kidding about the squirrels. We actually, our security at our Omaha office had to tell someone to stop feeding the squirrels because they were getting into people's cars and chewing the wires, and the company did not want to be liable for the damage to people's cars. So it is very real. And that kind of thing happens all the time. Actually, I live outside of the metropolitan area, out in the country, and it's common that squirrels will kill the power out here.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So
instead of a bug, you have animals. Ooh.
It's also very, very quiet.
Not raccoons. I'm not sure. Not aware of any raccoons in the UK though.
Yes, we have raccoons here.
So I'll just take a moment just to remind everyone, please give us feedback. We've got the QR code, the link in the chat. It's very appreciated. And email addresses are in the chat, so people can follow up with you both if they have further questions. I think we will probably wrap it up there.
Okay.
It doesn't seem like we're getting any more questions at this point. Our next session is at 3 o'clock, and then at 4:30, Linda, you're back with another session.
Right.
I hope that we can see everyone.
Yes.
Again later today.
And that one's going to be a very fun interactive one where we're talking about young and seasoned is the title of that presentation.
You're the
Yeah.
young one, right?
No, I'm the seasoned.
Now, Andy, your delegate number, you find it by logging into my GSE. But I can post my email address here. And if you would like to send me an email, Andy, then please feel free. If you have any other issues with the feedback.
All right.
Perfect. Okay, I'll just give Andy a moment to take that. Okay, we'll wrap it up there. And thank you, Linda. Thank you, Paul.
Yes.
Thank you so very much.
No problem. No problem. Thank you again. Bye, everyone.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.